Thank you for joining us and welcome to another edition of Answers Network. I'm your host, Alan Cardoza. For those of you that have been listening, sending in questions and comments, thank you so much. Please continue to help spread the word that this show brings on special guests that can inspire and educate while bringing answers and options to making our lives happier, healthier, and more successful. And remember, if you can't listen live, go to our website at answers.network and browse through a variety of heartfelt topics. Find something that touches you. I also have a favor to ask. Please forward one of our shows to your social media group and to someone you know who can benefit from a particular subject. This is one powerful way that we can make a positive difference in the world together. Now, our topic today is also the title of our guest's new book, Personal Effects: What Recovering the Dead Teaches Me About Caring for the Living. In this book, Personal Effects, the owner of the world's leading disaster management company chronicles the unseen world behind the yellow tape and explores what it means to be human after a lifetime of caring for the dead. Our guest, Robert A. Jensen, is the chairman of Kenyan International Emergency Services. He joined Kenyan in 1998 after serving as a U.S. military officer. His career has been spent restoring order and leading transitional change after a crisis for companies and for governments. Now, he leads Kenyan, a 110-year-old multinational corporation that is retained by over 600 leading businesses and governments. Now, Robert has directed and been involved in response and recovery efforts for numerous international large-scale crises, including terrorist attacks, criminal and civil investigations, natural disasters, and countless transportation accidents. Now, these have included complex events such as bombings in Oklahoma City, the UN headquarters in Baghdad, Bali nightclubs, and of course the 9/11 attacks that we all remember. Now, as well as earthquakes such as the Haitian earthquake, which I had many people that I knew that went down there to help as well. So he has also worked with multiple large-scale aircraft, rail, and maritime disasters. This is someone who has seen a lot. Robert, welcome to Answers Network.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Well, it was interesting when I was discussing this with my producer. We were talking about this show, and with this show we really focus on a lot of really positive things, and we said, well, is this really a good topic? And we went back and forth, and what we decided was that this is part of our reality. This is part of the reality of the entire world. So learning about some of the things that occur and some of the things that you do, I think will probably open up a lot of eyes and a lot of hearts for a lot of people. So that's one of the reasons why we felt that this was a good fit to have you on here, and really appreciate you coming on.
You're welcome. Look, I always tell people you don't want the memories that I have. You don't want to see what I see. But out of that, there's a lot of good to learn, and there's a lot of good to see. And I think I'm a pretty positive person when it comes to life. Mm-hmm. I've been to 2 events in my lifetime that have killed close to 250,000 people in the time it took to have a cup of coffee in the morning. Yeah. And I don't dread getting on a plane. I don't lose sleep. I don't worry about stuff that I can't control. Instead, I've learned to appreciate what I can control. I've learned to appreciate what I have. And I think that people, because we can't control some of these things, terrorists are going to get lucky sometimes because law enforcement can't be right 100% of the time because they're human. Mm-hmm. We're going to have accidents because we're human, and we're never going to control Mother Nature. So we have to accept that some of these things that we don't want to happen could happen or are going to happen, and we may just be the ones involved. And you don't want to live in that sense of fear or dread. Instead, live empowered, that knowing there is stuff you can control. There's stuff you can do to make a difference. And you get one go around, so make it good.
There's a story I've told that talks about people that have gone through life for whatever reason and never had any adversity, and they've never even seen it. And one of the stories is Freddie Prinze Sr. A lot of people don't know it, but I mean, he had everything that was going for him. And when he did have what a lot of us would consider a minor setback, a girlfriend breaking up with him, he couldn't handle it and he took his own life. So I think that there's a lot to be said about us understanding what you've just said, that there are things that are out of our control. There are things that, that we do need to know. And there's some level in which I believe it can make us stronger. What's your thought?
Yeah, absolutely. And I use the analogy, and I think some of it's generational to, when there was a draft, and I did several years in the military. And when I went through some of my first training, I don't ever recall a drill sergeant asking me if I could do something or if I wanted to do something. Even if I didn't think I could, or even if I didn't want to, and there are many things I did not want to do, I did. And all of a sudden I realized, wow, there's a lot you can do. And you don't have to quit, because it's not at the point you should be quitting. And I think a lot of that has been missed with people as we've gotten some more conveniences, as we've gotten things instantly. We've lost learning patience. We've lost learning, the ability that sometimes we have to wait in line, and sometimes our deliveries aren't going to be in 24 hours, and sometimes the things we want, we're not going to have. And that's a big leap from that to being in a hotel that's just blown up. But I think that the concept is the same, that resilience is learned over time. Resilience is developed and passed from generation to generation. I think we've lost some of that. And then I think we lose focus on again, the things we can change, because we're distraught. We sometimes lack good leaders, and individuals really can make a difference. A good leader can make an absolute difference, not so much in applying resources, but in applying confidence and telling people, hey, you know what? It is going to be okay. And let me listen to you. And even though I don't have a good answer for you, I don't have the answer you're looking for, I do have an answer. And more importantly, one of the things that's made a difference for me, and I tried to write about in the book, is, a lot of consultants in business tell you things you should do, and then they go away. When I talk to people, I always tell them I have a crystal ball, and it doesn't tell me who's going to call next, when or what. Frankly, I don't care, because I know somebody's going to call, and I know it's going to be focusing on probably a large loss of life. And I'm not going to tell you what you should do and then walk away. I spent my lifetime saying, here's what you ought to do. You should think about it, and then I'll be next to you.
Right.
So even though it's going to be a dark night and a dark day, I'm going to be there with you or my team or the people we work with or the system, and we're going to get you through this. And where people get lost is they're so worried about what's occurred that I call it trying to defuse the bomb that's already blown up. They're worried about, well, why did prevention not work? Well, because we can't prevent everything.
Right.
Instead of focusing on the consequences that affect the people that are in front of them.
No, I get that, and it makes a lot of sense. Why don't you, if you could walk us through a particular tragedy, because I think there's a lot of things that people don't realize. So, for instance, in the recent Surfside condo collapse in Miami, talk a little bit about how survivors and families, how you support them, how they're supported as they transition to a new reality, and even how those of us that may know someone who has just gone through something like this, what are some of the things we can do to support them?
Sure. And before I give a more technical answer, let me give a broader answer to help set a stage. I describe people as, we love our routines. Most people do. And we have routine. And every day we drive down the same road or the same highway or walk the same path. And when a building collapses or a bomb goes off or something occurs, that path now is opened up into this big chasm. And the living are stuck on one side.
Mm-hmm.
They just slammed on the brakes to the car or the bike, and they're there and they're in shock. And the chasm is represented by the loved ones who are missing, the friends who are missing or deceased. And the other side of that chasm is the transition, is what's going to happen in life for the people who move on. And the goal is for everyone to move on, not in the sense of just get over it and move on, but in the sense of life has to continue for the living. And there is going to be a normal, but it's going to be new. And the job of the responders of the system is to have a plan and tools to build a bridge so that the families, the survivors, can get on that bridge and cross. So what that process involves is, first of all, telling them what to expect. And that can be for typical events that we go to, a year and a half for recovery and identification. Now, Surfside, it's a building collapse. So not to offend listeners or be too detailed, that means most people are going to be intact. When a bomb goes off, a high-speed impact, we don't have people that look like us. And that could mean a year and a half or 2 years or 3 years of DNA. And so it's setting the expectations and then telling them what is their role. Their role is in understanding what occurred, understanding the investigation process. You don't know how many people come to an event and say, well, I'm hearing on TV this is what happened. Yeah, but that's speculation. Let me explain the process and give you some examples of an airplane accident that might take 4 years to investigate, so that you give people knowledge. You're not there to protect them from information. You're there to answer questions and use your experience to say, here's what to expect, what the system's role is, and what your role will be. Where it fails is when we don't do that. So I'm not sure I answered your question. I hope so.
Well, no, yeah, I believe you did. And I think the other part is that I think people can turn to you and feel like they can get something that's honest, that's direct, and that's not sensationalized. You mentioned that people will say, well, but I saw this in the media. Well, they have to understand that the media has a vested interest in sensationalizing, your grief. And go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely true for some media, but I also think it's to the point where we've gotten where we want to dumb things down, or we're just going to give a headline and not give context. An example I use is Germanwings. That was the aircraft that went down in the Alps where the co-pilot, intentionally crashed the aircraft, killing 149 people, and then his suicide for 150 total. And about a week and a half after, I was at the Family Assistance Center that we'd set up in France, Marseille, I think. And the families had seen in the paper that the French president had announced that 150 DNA profiles had been recovered from the site. That's a factual statement. But to them, what they're hearing from the press is that means their loved ones have been identified. They're going to get their loved ones and go home. That's not what that meant. But that's what the headline was. And it wasn't, I don't think, to be sensational. It was just to say, here's progress. But because of all the CSI shows on TV and expectations, people are, I'm going to get loved ones. So I go to the gendarmerie and say, hey, can you actually brief what that means to the families to help them set expectations? And the answer is no, that's the job of the prosecutor. So I go to the prosecutor and said, can you brief? Oh, no, that's science. That's a gendarmerie. I said, okay, got it. No one wants to tell people. So do you care if I brief? Oh, not at all. And I've done these briefs in multiple countries around the world to, different events. So they're not new for me. So I start by saying, look, this is information that some of you may not be ready for. So I'll pause. Some of you have children. You may not want children in the brief. But I want to talk about the practical realities. And you've heard this headline. Well, we've had a high-speed impact. And so we don't have people who look like us, unfortunately. And what we have is, to date, about 3,000 human remains fragments have been recovered. And out of those, the rapid DNA testing shows that there's 150 unique profiles. We know no one on the ground was reported missing, so we believe now we've accounted for everyone on the aircraft. But until we collect samples from all of you, some of you have asked for have been asked to provide a cheek swab, but many haven't yet. And all those have to be put into a laboratory system to generate a reference, one per missing person. And then those have to be matched. And that's going to take probably 4 to 6 months. And you would think people, oh my God, no one wants to hear that. Well, they need to hear it, because now they can say, well, do I stay at the Family Assistance Center? Do I plan a funeral? because there's all these practical things that people need to go through, because a large part of what we deal with is being able to answer the biggest question of all: did it really happen? Because families see them on TV. They see the building collapse, they see the plane, but their loved one isn't home. And in an expected loss, a typical loss, the system says, I have a remains. You have to make a decision. You making the decision is kind of that reality that this has occurred. But for me, I travel all the time. And so me not being home is a normal state of affairs. So one day if my husband gets a call and says, hey, Robert's plane's gone down, or one of the hotels he was in is blown up. Okay, so he's not home, but he'll come home. Well, how do you prove it to me? Where's his remains? How do I accept this and make action to get on that bridge?
Right.
And that is the challenge.
One of the things that you talk about in the book that I think was very interesting to me was you talk a lot about personal effects and how how important that is to a lot of the people. That's something that they can hang on to. So share with us a little bit, as you did in the book, how and why do personal effects seem to take on such a greater level of importance and meaning when the bodies of their loved ones are still not even recovered?
Well, the personal effects are the physical reminders, and they're often hugely sentimental, not soluble value, not a monetary value, but an even more important value, a sentimental value. And in those cases where we may not have a loved one to return, and sometimes we don't ever get successful with IDs. But even in the beginning, when we don't know if we're going to have everyone recovered or not, the personal effects are part of that realization that this has occurred, because it's an item that somebody wouldn't just discard. It's an item that somebody wouldn't leave alone. It's a picture recovered from the bottom of the ocean, like we had from Egypt Air or Alaska 261 off the coast of California, and where there's photographs of events that occurred for people who are no longer here. But the family member can actually see the event, and they can think about the happiness that it brought. And I use another example is my grandfather used to smoke a pipe, and that smell is a very distinctive smell. And I smoke a pipe sometimes. And so now when, people come up and say, oh my God, you immediately remind me of, my grandfather or somebody. And that's like, okay, well, thanks. I feel old, but now I feel older. But it's the physical, the sense of smell or the sense of touch or the sense of feel, that's a very strong emotion for many people. And having that actual item back to hold or to touch, or it's an action we had after one crash. We will not return an item how we think it should be returned. We ask the family member if they'd like something back, and then how would they like it back? Unless it's contaminated, we don't clean it until the family tells us to clean it, because we had that case where the mom said, for 17 years, I've washed my son's shirt. I don't want you people to be the last one to wash his shirt. I want to wash it. And it's also, again, sometimes that realization. We had a case where we had a young man who was on a flight crashed, very visible public crash. And his mom's because I had to talk to his mom several times. And she said, look, I went to work. He called me because he was an airline employee. He said, look, he got on the flight. I went home. I didn't feel good. I took a nap, and I woke up and I saw on TV his plane had crashed. That's how she found out her son was deceased. And then she went from this to, I don't think he died in the crash. I think he swam to an island. So go put food on the island, go look for him. Okay, well, let's look at the facts. Did he board the aircraft? Well, everything indicated he boarded the aircraft, the check-in, all the documents. And we found a lot of his personal belongings, passports and some other stuff. And then at one of his suitcases, this was a crash that occurred in the water, there were some of these orange hair rollers. And so they were in his suitcase. Now, they could have been picked up by somebody in a fishing boat and just put into the suitcase that was partially damaged to hold it. Lots of different things happen in the recovery process. So I went to her house, and because she had asked for everything and she wanted it personally delivered. So, okay, look, I'll bring it up to you. And do you want to just put it in the closet? How do you want to do this? As you sit with the family, because they talk about their loved one. And you listen because it's important to them. And then say, we would like to lay these things out so we can go through them each one at a time, if that's what you would like. And she said, yes. So she led us to the kitchen. We put a big sheet out on the table, laid everything out with her out of the room, and then we covered up so there's not this big pile of things to come into. And the first thing we do is we hand her passports, because those were the first items that we were able to identify. And she put them against her forehead and rocked back and forth a little bit about her son. You know, he needs to come home, because she hasn't gotten on the bridge herself. This is a year after the accident, because he was one of the people in this accident we didn't recover, just because of the physics of the accident and the reality. 1 of 4. And then we got to these rollers, and I said, look, these, you know, I've seen your son's picture. He had short hair, so I don't think they're his, but so I'll take them back if they're not. She says, oh, no, these are his grandmother's. She kept them in a suitcase. So he knew how important, he would never just lose those. So then she stops and she says, Robert, you're telling me my son is not coming home. I'd say, you know, I wish I could tell you that there's a chance your son's going to walk through that door. I have nothing better. But that's not the reality. And that's not what the facts show. Your son died that day the plane crashed. I just don't have a headstone to give you. And I wish I did. But your son is not going to come home. And so for her, that was part of that process. That's the value of personal effects. And for people, again, it's all the special memories. It's the positive thoughts. It's the value of this person meant something. They're not just a number in the system. They're not just somebody that's going to get piled in a bunch of rubble and be forgotten.
Yeah. For those of you listening, we are speaking with Robert A. Jensen. His new book is called Personal Effects: What Recovering the Dead Teaches Me About Caring for the Living. We are going to be talking about a lot of other stuff as it relates to this subject. So stay with us. We'll be right back. You're listening to Answers Network.
Founded over 30 years ago to meet the needs of families in crisis, West Shield has continually focused on resolving issues that negatively impact families and businesses. Our signature therapeutic transportation service helps to ensure that adolescents in crisis are safely transported to specialized schools, programs, and treatment centers with unsurpassed experience and success. We are supported by our full-service licensed investigation agency that has legally, professionally, and compassionately located hundreds of runaways and teens. We are experienced and qualified to help, offering solutions which may include referrals to our international network of top professionals in the fields of educational consulting, psychology, psychiatry, and investigations. Simply put, West Shield Adolescent Services and West Shield Investigations are the best solutions when your family is facing a personal crisis. Call 1-800-899-8585, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That's 1-800-899-8585, or visit our website at westshield.com. Thank you.
And we're back. We're talking with Robert A. Jensen, and we're talking about what he does, which is deal with the situation after disasters. And we have a question that's coming in, and this one is coming in from California, and it says, my brother is an ER doctor, and my husband is a captain in the fire department in San Francisco. Both told me that the '89 earthquake traumatized them in a way that was far beyond their everyday dealings with death and destruction. That disaster imprinted on their psyche differently, is what they said. What is your thoughts about this, and what is your personal process to prevent these massive events from affecting you long term? And again, it's from Renee in California.
That's a great question, Renee, and it's one I get a lot. And there has been a lot of study, not nearly enough, and there's not nearly enough action on the effect these events have on responders. And I often talk about the first fatality count from the incident, like Oklahoma City, 168. And then the second number that's going to come 2, 3, 4, 5 years after with the suicides from the responders who didn't get into a system or help to go through processing this. I always tell people that when you go to an event, you're going to go as one person and you will always come back differently. It's just the way it is, because you see and go through so many different things. And so it's important that, just like we tell families what to expect, you have to tell responders what to expect and what's normal. And so the invasive images, the invasive smells. I hear a jackhammer and I immediately think of Oklahoma City, which I went to in 1995 to do recoveries as part of an Army officer. And I walk by the airport every day with my dog that here in Key West. I smell jet fuel and I have tons of images. And so I hear a big truck and it reminds me of the bombing of the hotel in Baghdad for the UN headquarters. Those are normal. So I just have to process them. And so what we tell people is you have to expect things are going to change and you have to manage those and if you reach a point you can't, then you have to stop and figure out how to try to make it better. And part of that is bringing in people to do post-event surveys and triage people post-event, the responders, to say, okay, everyone doing okay? How are people dealing with it? And there'll be a small percentage that are having a little bit harder time, and it may be their first event or maybe their 10th event. And then you have to follow up with them individually to say, let's talk through what's happening. Number one, see if this is a job you should be doing. And if not, what are the different jobs? I've had employees, I had one team member had been with us for years, and she was at a crash, a particularly difficult crash. And middle of the night, she went to her buddy, because we assigned buddies, and said, I can't do this anymore. I'm done. So we put her on a plane and got her right home. You have to be able to evacuate people. So part of your response system has to be who cares for the responders. It's very important. As for me, well, I'm trying to step back now and retire. And in fact, my husband, I've just sold the company so that I can start to focus on doing some different things in the world, because I don't want to keep going to the events. And not because I get tired of the families. I never get tired of the families. I get tired of the bureaucracy.
It doesn't surprise me. And I think you mentioned earlier on, we were talking about, the way in which people react. From a training standpoint or from a hiring standpoint, how do you determine the employee or the person that you bring on that's going to be able to handle this and get through the job? And I realize that things can change, as you said. Somebody can be their 10th one and go, okay, that's it, I can't handle it. But what are some of the things that helps you identify who can handle it and is going to be able to handle this type of job?
Well, we look at what we call feeder industries, because there really isn't a job description for a mass fatality responder, because it's part of a huge system, and it's certainly not just us. There's hundreds of people who play into this system, and those are people who are generally in service industries. They're there to help and care for others, minister, the church, religions, not-for-profits, social workers, technical, law enforcement, fire, medical. People all said, my job's going to be helping other people. And then, again, looking at the behavior when somebody gets on scene. And there's other things that are more technical you do. You don't keep somebody on scene unless you absolutely have to for more than 2 weeks, because you don't want it to become their disaster. Talk about, again, saying expectations for what they're going to see, and then asking questions about how they're dealing with it. And also during the incident, a lot of times I spend, and I'm a field guy, I'm not a desk guy, is walking around just looking and talking and listening, because that's where you see the problems.
Now, you mentioned a particular family or a particular woman that you dealt with. How do you differentiate between helping people find closure after losing their loved ones to one of these tragic events, and just helping them transition to a new reality? It seems like it would almost be an individual thing.
It's you look at a forest and you have to understand every tree, but I don't think I find people find closure, because I don't use the word closure, because I don't think closure exists.
Okay.
I think, and that's a word that means many things to many people, and I'm not trying. Hopefully I don't sound harsh. I'm not trying to
No,
be.
no.
It's a transition, because you just don't have this magical moment that says, oh, now I'm happy and I'm fine again, because this never ends for people. Some of these events can go on, and I write in the book about the World War II graves, about the boy that was identified from the Titanic, almost 100 years after the sinking of the ship. And so it's a period of transition, and it's a period of adjustment of what was the life I had, what are the things I remember, to what is going to be the life I have, and how will I deal with, as a survivor with an injury, change in mobility, or as a family member and a friend, knowing that I can go on without dishonoring the memory of my loved one. Maybe I'll get remarried, maybe I'll have new relationships. And how do I enjoy life knowing that my loved one isn't here to enjoy it with me anymore, which was my plan. It was everyone's plan, but unfortunately that's not life. And so you have to listen to each family. And when you give briefs, afterwards you're prepared for questions. You don't get the same questions over and over again, because it's new information. People didn't get that class in high school. But you'll get questions that vary. And I had one family member come up to me after a brief and said, and this was where we had an aircraft that gone missing, but then we found wreckage with human remains, so we know there weren't going to be survivors. So it went from a missing brief to now we unfortunately have information. And afterwards, when the person in the audience came up to me and said, I have to go home. I have to tell my husband we don't have 3 kids. We have 5. And I got to go home and tell, my niece and nephew that their mother and father are dead. How do I do that? It's asking for practical help, and then being able to understand each of the families. Because again, that's part of the system where there's so many different agencies involved. If they don't share information and talk, then the family feels they have to repeat themselves each and every time, and then they lose confidence, because it's one of 100, and we don't want one of 100. There is one person, and you asked earlier when we started about those who are friends to support people. So for every person that's missing, there is a pyramid of people that are related to them, either by biology or by personal relationships. And each one of those people have people related to them. And they're not going to want to talk about this or know what to do. And the best thing they can do is listen, help them know what to expect, and to make that journey at their pace. Sometimes just acknowledging it, and people have the hardest time acknowledging loss.
Yeah, and you actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking about, for some of us are uncomfortable with talking about other people's loss. Some are not, but I think that I don't know how we find out exactly what works best for each individual person. But I know that for myself, after I had lost my father, I found that I started to want to not be around people because they kept asking how I was doing about that. Which to me was, I was like reliving it again and again and again, because they're like, oh, I heard, how are you doing with that? And I know that they're coming from a place of care and love. How do we figure out, is this the time to offer up our condolences, or sometimes are we better off to not ask them and let them bring it up?
Well, it's hard to generalize, because every case is different. My standard approach, without having a picture in front of me of each individual, is, first of all, you acknowledge the loss and you acknowledge the relationship. I'm really sorry about your father. My gosh, from all the things I've read, he had such an impact on people, had such a great life, and I'm really sorry. And if I can do anything, let me know. And then I've told you, I'm acknowledging that I'm aware. I'm telling you that, wow, look at all the things I've heard. He must have, because most people have, nobody comes into this. Most people don't come into this world and not do something that makes a difference, because most people are good. So you acknowledge that and say, and if you need help, I'm here. And now let's talk about what we're going to do next. Let's look to the future. It's not a and my degree was in criminology, so my learnings were on the street as a cop and in the Army. So I had a different background than many people. So I don't know what a psychologist or sociologist or how they would describe that. Just know that that's what works for me, because I'm just putting it right out there. I'm not going to dance around it and make people wonder, well, do they know? Do they not know?
We have another question or statement that's coming in. And again, I want to thank those that take the time. I know that there are many people that are working during the day, and so they get our notification and they have a question, but they know that they can't listen live. So they'll send it to us, and then we'll get the opportunity, or they'll get the opportunity at a later time to watch it. But again, we appreciate the fact that you take your time to send the question in. This one reads, we have people in our country, from the young all the way to the seniors, who think disasters are just something they view on a movie screen or a television. They have never experienced a real disaster and are totally unprepared to cope with one if it did happen. I'm looking forward to reading your book. From what I can read in the press release, you have a unique view on survival and coping in the face of disasters. It says, and my question is, do we have a situation with the video games and the constant bombardment on movies and television that in some cases people have become more desensitized to these disasters because they've never actually been involved in it? And that's and again, that's from Andy in Michigan.
Andy, thank you for the positive comments and a very good question. I think we're absolutely not desensitized to real events. We're desensitized to the idea of the event occurring, and therefore we're not prepared. And I see it every time I see a school shooting, every time I see something without the reality of the actual hearing the people cry and seeing the real pain, feeling the blood run out of somebody, holding somebody's hand as they don't survive, and then trying to comfort a family member as their loved one is, as the ambulance is turning off the siren because they're not making it, is very different than what we see on TV. And because people don't have that experience, I think it's very easy to say, well, it didn't look that bad on TV and it was a game. So, because everyone got up after the game. So I guess it really is okay. And it's not okay. Again, not gloom and doom. Disasters are going to happen. You have to be prepared, but they don't pan out like they do on TV or in games. And unfortunately, that's, I think, an impression that some people have or are getting. And therefore, when the real event occurs, they are so ill prepared to deal with it, both the immediate needs to survive and then to manage the consequences.
Well, another question that kind of goes along with these disasters is, why do you think that so many of the mass fatalities frequently become the subject of conspiracy theories?
Because we love things to be clear and clean and organized, charts. And in a lot of events, everyone says, well, there should be somebody in charge. The reality of a mass fatality is there's no one single person in charge. There are multiple agencies who are in charge of very specific roles who have to come together. And as we know, bureaucracies don't always work well together in other people's spaces. And therefore, information gets put out by different people at different times without context. And if we haven't gone through the event in the right way, then that leaves doubt. And it's again saying, well, we're not going to talk about it because we don't want to scare people, or we don't think families need that information. When we do things like we respond to the World Trade Centers, let's get an engineer and architect in. Let's brief families on how a building could collapse. Again, let me explain the process. Let me explain who's involved in an investigation. Let's look through the report. Let's use some previous examples. When I wrote about Surfside, I wrote about the tower in Kansas City, the walkway that collapsed, and said, here's what happened there. There's nothing new. It's just new people learning old lessons. Same thing with the Grenfell Tower Fire in the United Kingdom that we spent years, responding to return the belongings. Here's the system. Here's how it works. And yet in that case, when I put together a website for family members, And I wanted to list agency roles. You'd be surprised from governments who were, oh, we can't do that. That's not for you. We don't, we're not going to talk about it. Well, why not? These are all documents that are published, but they're hard to find. So let's make it easy for people so we can quash the conspiracy theories. So it's a lack of, I think, transparency. It's a normal bureaucracy when you have multiple government events. And then when you have fatalities, it's very emotional. And I was at Oklahoma City. I was at 9/11. I did the crash that killed the Secretary of Commerce in Bosnia in 1995 or 96. Tons of stuff where there's conspiracy. And I'm on the ground. I'm in the rubble and the wreckage. And so because my view is not representing one agency, we're there to help. Our end goal is, what are we doing to take care of the families? Because that's what we're hired to do. That's our ultimate customer. And that gives you a little bit different view.
So one of the things that we do on this show a lot is that we have happy endings. What's your definition of a happy ending, or to the best of your ability? And I would hope that you have some things that you can, focus on. And I think about the fact that, and one of the things that I've done is I've returned children from human trafficking, and people will say that, oh my God, there can't be anything, it's, that's so horrible and everything else. But there is something positive about it when you can return somebody, or when you can do something. What do you look to that allows you to kind of keep going?
Well, for me, it may be a little bit different because it's not about me. How I think, what I feel doesn't matter, because no one forced me to do this. This is a career path that I fell into, or I chose. And so I'm doing the job that I'm hired to do, or that I agreed to do. I think maybe for me, how I answer that is, what's happy? Well, the world is generally a happy place. When I look at the advances in science and technology, when I look at the things that we can do now, and the opportunities children have today that others didn't have, and I still look for the possibilities of success for our leaders, then that makes me happy. And I know there's going to be some bad days, but I never got the contract that promised me an endless rose garden, or good days and bad days. And I'm not minimizing the loss, because life is never the same for these families. But you're still going to be here, and you still got to make the best of it by looking what you can do to go forward. Because we can't do anything for the dead. We can't bring them back. We can give them dignity. We can give them a name. Mm-hmm. What we can do is help the living focus and be able to enjoy the rest of their life. Because after all, that's why we're here.
And one of the things that I thought of in doing the research for this interview was, it seems as though you've been instrumental also, though, in being able to point out when you discover what it is that caused things, or you discover information that can be helpful, that maybe you've made a difference in the sense that that particular thing may not happen the same way again, or you've reduced the fact of these things happening. I mean, that's some of the things that I was looking at when I was researching this.
Oh, thank you for that. Yeah, it's nice if some of these lessons are very painful. And so I'm of the school, some stuff I'm going to learn on my own, but if somebody can learn something from my mistake, make your own mistake and make it less painful, because you have the advantage. We're in an age where we have information, we share stuff, and the purpose of that isn't to fill up space. It's to say, hey, you may want to be careful before you do this, because it can end very badly.
All right. Well, the book is called Personal Effects, and I assume it can be purchased at anywhere books can be received, as far as Barnes & Noble or Amazon or whatever.
Yeah, in libraries. A lot of libraries ordered it, and I'm a big fan of the independent. A lot of independent bookstores have them, and I'm I like the big guys too, but the independent bookstores to me are fun. You browse, you get to talk to people. I'm near one. I'll go in, and if they're carrying my book, I'll sign copies for them. And of course, libraries. I'm a big fan of libraries also. So lots of places, Audible and Kindle and all those other formats.
That's great. And for everybody out there, know that I found it incredibly informational. There were things that I didn't know or that I didn't think of. This is one that you can check out. It is one that I took on as being very heartfelt. And Robert, I just want to thank you for sharing this information of something that a lot of us aren't really aware of exactly what goes on.
Well, you're welcome, and thank you for giving me time to talk.
All right. Now, for everybody out there, please, as we prepare to enter the new year of 2022, we're going to end this year by replaying one of our most popular shows with guest Christine Ariel. She's the author of Overwhelmed and Over It. Embrace your power to stay centered in a chaotic world. And please visit our archives of past interviews at answers.network, or you can subscribe to our show through iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and so many other great places where you can find our show. If there's a platform you're listening to that doesn't have our show, tell them you want it. And if you like what you hear, please leave a review. It helps us reach more people, and I want you to know that we greatly appreciate it. And the next time you're on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, please remember to stop by our page, check out some of our latest shows, and if you like them, please like us and spread the word. For everybody out there, we're wishing you a Merry Christmas, a Happy Hanukkah, and a prosperous New Year. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Marty Cove. You might remember me from roles such as Sensei in the Karate Kid films. I've done over 100 films and countless stunts in my career, and I've always given 100%. With the damage done to my body over time, I needed to find relief from my chronic pain. My passion for health and fitness drove me to find a natural way to combat muscle pain. Teaming up with doctors, detectives, and a compounding pharmacist, we've created Marty's Cobra Cove Ultra Strength CBD Cream. It's the only thing that has been strong enough to knock out my pain, and fast. Honestly, you may have tried the rest, but it's time to try the best. It's legal, it's safe, and 100% effective. Show your pain, no mercy. Go to www.martyscobracove.com.
You're listening to Answers Network with Alan Cardoza, only on LA Talk Radio.